All right, we're back. Thank you for your patience tonight. You know that we're running a little bit behind, but we're still kind of in recovery mode in this part of the woods, as it were. Let me just adjust this a little bit. I guess it'll be okay. The Virgo in me comes out every now and then, and it happens with the mic every so often. So, welcome to another night, another edition of Sunday Night AstroLive. I've been working on the show. I was just, whether it's like the intense activity of last week, or it's these eclipse energies that are really starting to hit, I was just flat out exhausted today. And in fact, I even took a nap at around, I don't know what, 4 o'clock, and with the idea that I would get up at around 5 and start to put together the final pieces of the show. And it was just like, that's not happening tonight. So we're here, you're here, I'm here, Jasper's not here. Hopefully we'll get a visitation from the Astro Cat, but we'll see what happens. Hopefully by next week, I'll have my new audio and video set up. I've been having some real problems with the green screen lately. So tonight I swapped out cameras with the idea that I would use an older camera and one that was a little more copacetic with the green screen. But as you can see, I'm still dealing with some of the radioactive goo. Maybe this is a sign of what's coming. The radioactive goo that's surrounding the ectomorphic field. So welcome to the show. We're going to let people kind of congregate and come on in tonight. We have a fair amount to cover. And it was interesting. So I did my last Sunday night show 2 weeks ago. And there was a comment on the comments page for YouTube. And one of the comments was, he's all over the place. If you weren't so all over the place, you'd be better. And the world is in such a dire place that it would be helpful if you were more focused. So, I thought about that. I'm open to practical, critical criticism. And I feel like in our world, we have a real disconnect between judgment and criticism, right? Because sometimes criticism can be really helpful, especially if it's warranted. I totally am open to warranted criticism, but a lot of people get that crossed over with judgment. So when they feel as if they're being criticized for something, or their performance is being observed, right, and there's a critical analysis that's related to their performance, whatever it is they're doing, they can feel judged. And I think the two things are separate, right? They're separate. And it's good to be able to handle criticism. So I put it out there. I'm like, what do you think? I went out to the rest of the internet, people who watch the show, and I posted the question over on Twitter, and I posted the question over on Facebook, and I got some very what I thought was important and positive feedback. And I would say about 95% of the feedback was, don't change a thing, or just do what you do, which I really appreciate. And thank you for that. And there was some other criticism that I thought was helpful. One of the things that people have asked is for timestamps. And I just got to say thank you to Mac the Cat, who's been putting up timestamps lately. And I really appreciate that. So when you go into the show at the end of the show, the first pinned comment will be the timestamps. So you'll be able to go through and just go to those places that you think are going to be the most meaningful for you. Okay. So we took care of that. In fact, we had taken care of that actually about a month and a half ago when Max started to put up the timestamps. And I'm really grateful for that. So the timestamps are there. They've been there for a while. You just haven't known where they are. They're not in the show notes, but they're on the pinned comments, right? So if you want to go to find out where the timestamps are, that's where they're going to be. So we got that covered. And I think the other thing that was probably somewhat helpful was to create, this is just kind of on me, right? To create some markers and some divisions where I'm going from one thing to another. And, it's what I do. I go from one thing to another. Sometimes people really like it. And sometimes people are like, fucking get to it, right? Get to it. There's two types of personalities in the world who are kind of aligned along, those corridors. And people that have standalone videos where they actually record something, those are very different, and they're very, very specific. They're very, very specific. Like they can take a Mars retrograde aspect and just do 15, 20 minutes on it and bang on it, right? And those are very helpful. And there are a lot of people who do those things that are quite good at them. A lot of the reasons why I do the live stream is because I'm just kind of wired that way. In my chart, I have a Uranus Jupiter trine. So I have Uranus and Leo in my 9th house, and it trines Jupiter in Sagittarius in my 1st house. So I like improvisation. I've always liked improvisation. I've always been very comfortable with improvisation. And again, I'm not curing cancer here by any stretch, trust me. But I like to think that what I do is kind of akin to jazz, where, if you ever go to a jazz show, you'll see the players, and eventually they get into the inner part of the piece, right? And they really start swinging. And I've always appreciated that with jazz music. And they find that groove. Or, I was never a big fan of the Grateful Dead, but if you went to a Dead show, that's what you were looking for. You were looking for that part of the show where the band would just take off and go into some kind of interstellar space where they were all just communicating at another level, and you were communicating with them. So that's what I have just naturally aspired to in my life in general. And these shows are they're an outgrowth of that. So there you go. Another story I'd like to tell along these lines has to do with a teacher that I had in college. And I've had this story before. His name is Francis Gretton, and he was one of my favorite teachers in college. And he was English. He looked like a sheepdog, and he sat in a chair in front of the class, and the class was image, symbol, and metaphor. And I had no idea what I was getting into with the class. I just knew I needed to take it. It was part of the curriculum to get a degree in English. And Francis, who was a Gemini, which I would find out later, not that long. In fact, I think he even said it in class one day. Although back in the 80s, talking astrology was, not really front and center. So what he would do is he would sit down in a chair, and he'd have this little stack of papers right next to him. And every now and then he'd get up and do something. But most of the time it's just him in the chair. And I wound up looking forward to this class almost more than any other class, because he would start with something and he would just go. And I freaking loved it, right? By the time, we were at the end of the class, we'd covered, oh, look who's here. It's the AstroCat. Come on up. All right. Came off his throne. There he is. The AstroCat's with us tonight. And, by the time the class was over, he'd taken everybody on a journey, and I just loved it. I knew how to, take the anchor up and just go with him. And I'll never forget, there was this one guy who sat in front of me. He was kind of one of these jockey guys who was taking English, which is always kind of interesting. And he said, God, I hate this fucking class. I can't follow this guy. I don't know where he's going. I didn't say anything. I'm like, man, I love this class. This is right up my alley. So not that I pattern what I do with what Francis did, but I can certainly relate to it. And for all of you who gave me some feedback, I appreciate that. And, hopefully we'll keep things a little bit tighter and yet maintain some of the free flowing stream of consciousness that comes with live streaming. And I don't know a lot of people, honestly, in this world that live stream. David, my buddy, is one of them. He's, you know, he can freewheel and improv with the best of them, right? So David live streams, and I don't know too many people in this medium that do. So it's kind of its own particular genre and experience. The other thing that I got some pushback from, or feedback on, both pushback and feedback, was taking all the time to connect with Chattaria. And, that's just not going to end for a number of reasons. One of them is because, we have this really interesting, loose knit online community that, I'm incredibly proud of, that we exist in this little temporary autonomous zone for about 3 hours. And everybody that comes together seems to be, for the most part, really resonating to the same chord. That played out last week when we had our event here in the Hill Country, which I haven't spoken about on this show. This is the first Sunday night show since the event last weekend. And I think this time last week we were just finishing up dinner, and we were getting ready to do some Yataria, right? The whole idea was to get some karaoke together and try to close out a summer of yacht music. Well, we got the karaoke together, and I think maybe Lisa L.A. Bliss did a clear yacht tune with Samantha Sang, and man, she just killed it, absolutely killed it with that track. But there was a lot of other singing and genres going on that night, and it was absolutely fantastic and a lot of fun. And David did Van Morrison's Sunny Side of the Street, so you had the Leo King doing Sunny Side of the Street, which I think was really appropriate. And at the beginning of the night, as I was setting everything up, I've been talking for 3 days, and it's a bit of a grind, especially on the energy side. It's not that I didn't have a voice, but whatever kind of resonance and timbre or whatever I had in my voice was just not there at the beginning of the night. And thank God I was able to, MC that event. And then, the wheels are turning in my head. Like, okay, what am I going to sing? What's going to be able to connect with where my voice is at? So I settled on Space Oddity by David Bowie, and it worked pretty much. But at the beginning of the night, I was kind of terrified, actually, because I'm not a great singer by nature, and I don't need any deficits to start with. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll catch up to where we. But what was really great about that was just the amount of talent and the heart. Not everybody's a great singer, and people who were not great singers went up there and they sang their heart out, and it was really good. Of course, we had some ringers in the audience, and goes without saying they were fantastic. But the entire event was better than I could have expected. And we're going to do it next year. It's going to be on the eclipse. It's going to be one of the first of 2 major eclipses that come right through Texas. So there's a block of rooms already available at the Inn of the Hills. And if you're interested in going, I highly suggest you book a room. So that'll be under Harvest Moon. And all you have to do is go to the Inn of the Hills. The hotels are going to fill up. People are coming to Kerrville for that eclipse. And we'll be there. It'll be Harvest Moon number 5 under the eclipse sun. Should be very interesting. Of course, the companion eclipse will come around in 2024 in April. And that's the second of the total solar eclipses that will complete the Great American Eclipse cycle. And it's a heavy cycle, and eclipses sometimes can be very heavy energy. We're going to be talking about the upcoming eclipse on the 25th tonight. And whenever eclipses come around, I do my best to contemplate them and do my best to understand what the significance of an eclipse is and how it can impact people lives. I mean, throughout history, eclipses and comets were seen as omens, and not good omens. They were omens that the gods were displeased, and that there would be um, events that would unfold, after these major events that would not bode well for humanity. And I think that is buried very deeply inside of our DNA. It's part of our collective unconscious, or collective consciousness inside the collective unconscious. So a lot of our fears and a lot of our phobias and anxieties, a lot of our demons and shadows, dwell in that area and have archetypal expressions. And the eclipses are right at the top of the list. So anytime you start to talk about an eclipse, everybody goes into fear mode. And, I've looked at a lot of eclipses throughout history, eclipses over time, eclipses that have affected people that I know. I've seen eclipses hit somebody like my own biological son. He had the full Pisces sun eclipse directly on his sun. I think it was might have been 2015. And I can tell you right now, he changed. I mean, he changed. There was kind of a before and after moment, and he's still, a great dude, and I love him to death. But he was, why do we say that? Love him to death. That's a stupid kind of phrase. Love him to life. Just love him. Anyway, but it was striking watching the eclipse like hit his son directly. I'll never forget it. It was striking. I don't want to go into the details, but I can tell you, in a lot of ways, he wasn't the same afterwards. It wasn't that he was impaired. It wasn't as if he was damaged. But I think this is interesting. This is an interesting topic here. So he was playing baseball and started off as a tournament weekend. And he always pitched the opening game. And he was great. I mean, he was just absolutely lights out. I mean, he was just getting out the other team out, either striking him out or they just kept hitting ground balls right back to him. I mean, he was in total command. And that was the best part of his game, was that he was a nifty pitcher. He had a lot of good junk, and he could keep hitters off balance. He wasn't a great hitter. He was an okay hitter, but it wasn't really the best part of his game. He was actually a really good fielder too. But there was this one guy who started to play with our team. And, we get into some of what I would call astro symbolism. And, we're talking about eclipses, and this guy's nickname was Sunshine. And he was named after a character from, I think, what is it? Remember the Titans or something like that. He kind of looked like the quarterback Sunshine. He was a big kid, blonde hair, real strong, right? And so but he really wasn't on our team. He was just playing with our team. And it felt like my son felt kind of maybe threatened by this guy, because this is what happens sometimes. Right. And I know for a fact that this guy was a Gemini, and my son is a Pisces. So their sons squared against one another. And if you wanted to look at it from that perspective, right, it was almost like somebody larger and bigger who was playing with our team kind of eclipsed my son in a lot of ways, even though that really wasn't the case. Anybody with some rationality and some life experience under their belt would kind of work through something like that. But for him, I think he was 13 at the time, that wasn't really the case. So I could see that, right? It happened, right? It actually, I think, had to do with an actual person whose presence on the team, even though it wasn't directly affecting him, it did affect him. And it did, in his own mind, eclipse his own sense of self-worth. You're just trying to figure things out at that time in your life. So that happened. And I saw a direct correlation between the eclipse on his son and him. Saw it, witnessed it, period, end of story. And I've also told this story before where I had a client who, very interesting person. And when she became my client, she was probably mid 60s, maybe about 63, 64. And she had lost everything due to a drug and alcohol addiction. And she was a TV producer and quite successful, and a wife, mother. She had 2 children she had adopted, and she went spiraling out of control due to drugs. And this is somebody who lives with Pluto in Leo at 27 degrees on their ascendant. Okay. They live with that Pluto at 27 degrees on their ascendant their entire life. So when I started with her as a client, she was living in a, kind of assisted living recovery situation for women. And she was clearly the oldest of the women there. She was almost like the den mother of this place, and kind of kept the place in order. And a lot of younger women were there, and she'd been there for a little bit and was really doing her best to get back on her feet. A great success story. She wound up getting another media job and making $125,000 a year, which is almost unheard of, at her age. So for everybody out there who has struggled and has, had the bottom fall out in their life, and are trying to reboot your life, it's not impossible. I'm just telling you. Now, her circumstances might be a little bit different. She lived in, and still does, in the Washington, D.C. area. And because she's in the recovery world, she was able to wind up hooking up with an organization that was doing some video work and some grant writing and things like that. And there's government dollars there. So she was able to connect in with that. But when I started to work with her, the first thing I looked at her chart, the first thing I asked her was, what happened to you on September 21st in 2017? Because it's when the sun was right on Pluto and right on her ascendant. And she said, nothing. I said, well, what about, maybe afterwards or a little bit before? She said, nope, nothing. So you would think that an eclipse of such import hitting her ascendant with such a powerful planet like Pluto would have been an absolute game changer and life changer. And it wasn't. And the only thing that I could think of was that she had already gone through sort of the underworld of her life, right? Like her life in a lot of ways had been eclipsed. She had already gone through that kind of Plutonian initiation where she was rising from the ashes of her life. And, I'll use the word gods here, right? We'll use the word gods, maybe God with a capital G-O-D. It was like, no, you've already done the work. You've already gone through the fire. And, this theoretically, astrologically, might normally impact you, but you're spared. You're spared whatever kind of intensity might become of this eclipse. It was just another day in her life, right? But then you look at Donald Trump, almost same degree, 28, Leo rising, his Mars right there. And who could forget the images of Trump and his wife, Melania, and Barron? And let's see if I can call that up here. And Chattaria, I'll get right into you in a minute. I mean, this eclipse with Trump and the image always really stayed with me in a very big way, right? There was something about it. There was just something remarkable about the whole image. This is the one that really got my attention. Let me bring it up here. And it's like Trump is uh, almost like he's tempting. It's like he's tempting the gods. We'll talk about Trump tonight with the Mars retrograde as well, because I think he plays a role here. So you can see, I mean, even to me, this image is just so archetypal in a lot of ways. Melania always wears the sunglasses, but during the eclipse, of course, she's going to wear them. And then here's the sun, literally his biological son, in the shadow of the father, right? So the sun is actually being eclipsed here. And I've always thought that this image was striking in that you can actually see the eclipsed sun. This is, the SON versus the SUN. And then here's Trump, tempting the fates, staring into the black hole sun. And it was something that always stuck with me, right? Like he is going to just surrender to whatever it is that he's gazing into. And a lot of people thought he was stupid, or, tempting blindness. But if you know anything about Trump, you know that that's all conscious, right? He's doing that. He's doing that on purpose, because Trump, when you go into Trump Tower and you go to his penthouse suite, it's an altar to the sun. It's a temple of Apollo. That's exactly what it is. And Trump is very aware of his astrology. I have no doubt about that. Extremely aware of his astrology. And so what he did is he set his, the eye, the pyramid, or the apex of the pyramid, to be a temple to Apollo, or a grand suite to the sun. But Trump was never the same after that. He was never quite the same. It was as if his powers were literally eclipsed. So we can see there that, that played a role. At least it did in terms of his public image and his efficacy, because even though all of the aggression and all of the drag and distortion on the Trump presidency started even before he was inaugurated, it really picked up a lot of steam after that eclipse. And so when we look at the eclipse path during that time, it's a very telling one. And I've told this story again and again, just in terms of its significance. It's a fascinating eclipse path, and we're gonna look at it right now. Let me see if I can pop this out a little bit, and then after this, we'll get into Chattaria here. I had a nice picture there of it. Where did it go? Let's do this. I want to get a really, really good image of it so you guys can see what I'm talking about, and not one that's just a. Oh, here's a good one right here. Let's do this one. See if I can make it bigger. I like these images that you can make bigger, that way everybody can see them. All right. So this was the 2017 eclipse, right? And this was the great eclipse point right here. It's interesting. It's just northeast of Memphis, where they have a pyramid, right? So in between Memphis and Nashville. And it's really coming out right there. So we start up here at the 33rd state. Salem, right here, right? And part of what we're going to be talking about tonight is pitchforks and torches, which has to do with the Mars retrograde. So Oregon is the 33rd state. And the eclipse path comes right out here. And what is this? This is literally right here, the 33rd degree parallel. So we have 33 and 33. And when you see this eclipse path, it is really a forerunner in a lot of ways of what will become of the United States over the preceding years. We become a country divided. And this eclipse path, signals that division. And it doesn't necessarily align with sort of the north-south stuff, but in some ways it kind of does, right? And you can even see here with Kansas, where Kansas was this big state in terms of, where they're going to go with the South or where they're going to go with the North and that whole thing, right? So this is, not quite the Mason-Dixon line, but it really represents this whole idea of two Americas. And you can almost make with the exception of what happens over here, right, with California and the West Coast, and some of these northern states up here that seem to be much more related to what's going on down here, that, we're being divided into kind of a red and blue area, with the blue, the majority of the blue being above the line and the majority of the red being below the line. So that eclipse, I mean, you could clearly see what happened. You could, we became a divided country. And this is a really good representation of what the eclipse in its totality can do and look like, right? And then we'll go one more. And this is, when we're all said and done here, this is what this thing is going to look like when we put these two eclipses together. And of course, there's other eclipses that are part of the story. But in April of 2024, we'll have another eclipse. Now, what's interesting is that this is pretty much where I live and where Kerrville is, and which is where we had the event. And this is where the eclipse in October, the 14th of 2023, will also be going. So this eclipse path in October will be the precursor of the April 8th eclipse path. It's very rare when you have two eclipse paths that will follow each other. It's very, very rare. And so this is going to be total. And if I'm not mistaken, the other is annular. This is the total eclipse. The October eclipse is annular. And what does it do? It cuts the country literally into 4 quadrants, which, brings up a whole other set of talking points. If you've ever seen some of the maps, which we've gone over in this show in the past, the United States winds up being subsumed by 4 different entities, right? So this part, I mean, it almost fits perfectly in some ways. So this part of the United States winds up going to the European Union. This part of the United States, if we extend this line to, say, Arizona, winds up joining up with Mexico. This part of the United States winds up joining with China/Japan, and this part joins with Canada. So there are maps that do represent that. The other thing that this reminds me of in a lot of ways is the Hunger Games and the creation of Panem, which is the 12 districts, if I'm not mistaken, of Panem, which is the new United States portrayed in the Hunger Games. So if we can understand that on a social, cultural, philosophical level, that the country was cut in half by the first American eclipse, which I think is pretty clear for most people. Whether it's completely demarcated or not, we are experiencing living in a house divided. This one quarters it. And so when you look at the whole idea of quartering, It's a very interesting definition. There are two definitions of quartering. One definition is when an individual is quartered, meaning that they're essentially being pulled apart, right? Like, and I know this is a little heavy, but they would have a horse tied to each one of their appendages. One horse for each arm and each leg, and they would literally have these horses go in separate directions, and that would be the quartering of the individual, which is horrific. If you think about the times we're living in now. There's a lot of heavy and gruesome shit that's coming to the surface thanks to the South Node in Scorpio, and we're going to see more of that. And I'm actually going to be talking about an event tonight that happened recently that I actually think has some positive resonance, but the actual representation of the event is quite dark. But we don't necessarily live in a time where people are quartered. Will we live in a time again where people are quartered? I sure as hell hope not. But a lot of the older practices, and people don't understand this, they didn't used to have jails. Like, jails are a fairly modern institution. What they would do with people is they may hold them for a period of time, but then they would dispatch them. And how they would dispatch them was usually done in public. And it was generally done so people would never do those things again, right? Whether it was being beheaded, whether it was being burned at a stake. Some people were beheaded and burned or quartered, or you were put in gallows. There were all these absolutely horrible things that they used to do to people, usually in the public square. Lynchings, right? So the idea was that if enough people saw it, they wouldn't fucking do it. So maybe there was some gruesome wisdom associated with it. So we live in a bit more civilized time, although things seem to be escalating towards de-evolution much more rapidly. And we've seen stories over the last 3, 4, 5 years of people being beheaded in public, and just a lot of the gruesome acts that occurred prior to a period where there was seemingly more order, more established rules and ethics around morals. That's all degrading very quickly. But we're still not at that place where a lot of these things were done in public, like the quartering. Now, another definition of quartering has to do with soldiers who take quarters of the enemy's domicile. So, for instance, during the Revolutionary War, it would not be uncommon for English soldiers to occupy the homes of colonists, and the colonists would have to give them shelter, and either they would do it willingly, or under the threat of power and intimidation, they would do it anyway. And I don't think a lot of the colonists had strychnine or arsenic at the ready, so I don't think they could really poison their. And you have to keep in mind too, a lot of colonists were not into the war. A lot of the colonists were happy to be a part of the colony and be a part of the crown. So they probably were, feeding these guys up in a way that, hey, come on out there, have another kidney pie. Would you like to sleep with my wife before you go out in the field of battle? Because we got to take care. You got to take care of you against those upstarts and those renegades. So that's another version of quartering. But you can see the United States being quartered during this upcoming eclipse. But it's not that far away. Years go by fast, don't they? Seems like it was just 2022 last year. It was, but it's gone very quickly. and we'll be here again with the blink of an eye. And we really haven't gotten out of this cycle since 2020. It was the end of time and the new time in the interregnum, the in-between space between Pluto and Capricorn and Pluto and Aquarius. By the way, David gave a great presentation on Pluto and Aquarius at the event, and it was great having him. And a lot of you are familiar with Brian, Fixed Air Moon. Brian was there, and David's new partner Sophia was there. It was great to meet her. So all in all, it was just a wonderful meeting of the minds and of the tribes, and we're looking forward to doing it again next year. So the eclipses, they're coming, they're on their way, and this is a dark time of year. So we're having eclipses during a dark time of the year, which has its own kind of resonance, doesn't it? I think the time is going to change. We're moving towards Halloween, where the veils are really thin. We're going to talk about Halloween tonight. So the whole idea of an eclipse happening during the dark time of the year brings with it its own sense of sort of deep, ominous ambiance, sort of a heavy, dark ambient sound to the atmospheres. And there's so much going on in the world right now where, the whole idea of eclipses happening during a dark time, clicks into our genetic memory, of our ancestors who lived through a lot of the phenomena that we experience. If you go back far enough in your gene pool, you'll have people, whoever they were, being a part of, the comets that appeared in the sky like dragons, or the sun blotting out the sky. And those were very powerful, oftentimes supernatural events. And one of my favorite images of the eclipse happens in the movie Apocalypto, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. I love Apocalypto for a number of reasons. I think it's a tremendous action movie. I also think it's a very powerful love story, and it's the love that the protagonist in Apocalypto has for his wife and his two children and his land that motivate him to be able to outrun, outlast, and ultimately outduel his what's the word I'm looking for? The group that's there's a certain word I'm missing the word in my head. The group that's chasing him, right? This very intense group of like Mayan warriors, and there's an eclipse moment in that movie that changes the movie. It changes everything. And while it was a dark omen for the Mayans, on a personal level, it shifted the destiny of our hero in Apocalypto. It's an incredible movie, and Mel Gibson, I guess transgressors, that would be a word. Anyway, Mel Gibson directed that movie, and I think there's hardly any CGI or no CGI. I mean, it's pretty remarkable in that regard. And I highly recommend like watching some of the documentaries that were done on the making of Apocalypto, because Mel Gibson was a phenomenal director during that movie. What he did is he spent a lot of time in Mexico, and he was looking for some of the best Mexican talent that he could use. And these were people that were set artists and makeup artists. And it's an all Mexican cast. and he, you know, and with his talent scouts and um, casting directors, you know, really sought out people, and he was able to get feedback from them. And you know, a lot of the face painting and the hairstyling and even some of the artifacts, you know, they did those themselves. You know, it was really a very powerful communal effort. And when you go back and really pay attention to that movie, nobody ever felt like they were exploited by Mel Gibson. In fact, if anything, they had nothing but high praise for him. And when you watch him, you know, directing scenes, he has this passion and this enthusiasm, and he acts things out. And you know, he is able to transmit the energy of the scene to the people that he wants. And it's really interesting to, you know, watch somebody who is directing the energy of a major project like that. So let me see if I can find the image of the eclipse moment from Apocalypto, because it's really a very, very powerful moment. And for the Mayans, um, they saw this as darkly ominous, right? Really ominous. But it turned the tide. It turned the tide of the movie. And this is just such an incredible image. And what they were doing, I guess there's a whole thing of total eclipses on films. This is interesting. We have a slideshow here. Right here. Here we go. Can I make it bigger? If you haven't seen Apocalypto, I highly recommend it. It's not really for the squeamish, but so in this moment, the high priest, the Mayan high priest, begins to see the so-called shadow across the path of the sun, right? And he's recognizing that this is a heavy moment, a very heavy, and they're doing all of these incredibly gruesome sacrifices in order to appease the gods. And in that moment, when the eclipse comes, they see it as a sign. And the sign is that we have appeased the gods enough. The gods have had their share and have had their fill of human hearts and human heads rolling down the steps of the temple like soccer balls, right? So in that moment, everything stops. Now, what's also interesting is that there is a moment in the movie where a young girl seems to become possessed by a spirit who foretells of that moment. And then that moment happens. So there's actually a precursor to the eclipse from a young girl who emerges out of the jungle to tell the captors that this is coming. And that eclipse really marks the end of their world, because I don't want to give you any spoilers if you haven't seen Apocalypto, but it marks the end of their world. Ironically, it marks the beginning of our hero and protagonist's new life. We don't know what happens to him, but we do know that he survives, and we do know that he's reunited with his wife, or the mother of his children, and you know, they've escaped the catastrophe of so-called civilization. So even when an eclipse appears and looks, for all intents and purposes, quite ominous, in the case of that individual, it turned the tide of the movie. It turned the tide of his life, and was a massive pivot for him, and maybe for us, right? Like we're not necessarily living in the Mayan era, but you know, could there be something along the lines? We're talking about the big eclipse now. We're talking about the eclipses in October and April. You know, will that be the pivot of the individual? Because remember, that big eclipse is going to be in Aries, in 2024, which is the sign of the individual. So we live in incredibly interesting times, and we're living in a place where we are between ages. And when you're between ages, things become very unsettled. And David gave a very long presentation about Aquarius. And one of the things that I agree with him about Pluto and Aquarius is everything looking different, in what you think is happening isn't really happening. And I've been talking about this for a while. And this goes into this whole idea that, you know, we're going to be eating cricket milkshakes and, you know, all these rather sorted so-called delicacies that are so-called masters will be more than happy to feed us, right? That's already on the menu, and there's plans to do all these other things in terms of the carbon economy and all this other stuff. And with Aquarius, it doesn't always turn out that way. It doesn't turn, just keep that in mind, right? In the darkest moments where it looks like the shadow of the world is upon you, there's a very good chance that the intended result will almost always resort in the opposite that it was activated or intended to be. So just remember that. And we're in a 20-year cycle. I've said this over and over again. This 20-year cycle is the birth cycle. And it started with Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius. And we have contraction and expansion and contraction and expansion. And that's where we are right now. And will it get dark? Well, we're going to see it. We're headed into 2 eclipses in the darkest part of the year. And we're going to get into this Mars retrograde, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, which has its own intensity associated with it. All right. No, I think that was a pretty concise opener, don't you think? I didn't jump all over the place. I started at one point and I ended at another point, although we did jump around a little bit, didn't we? Because I didn't know I was going to talk about Apocalypto. All right. Now, the favorite part of my show is I get to check in and see who's here. Let's see. We got Lynette Jardine. What's going on, Lynette? Good to see you. One of my favorite Sagittarians. Divine Light Hazel. Florida goes to Cuba. No, I think to probably Mexico. There's Noreen Mazamink. What's going on, Noreen? Christine Mose. Braveheart. Yes. Braveheart. There were a lot of Bravehearts in Apocalypto. Susie Gemini in the house. What's going on, Susie? Love a Scorpio. Hey, Shirley Loshava. It was great meeting you. Great meeting you, Shirley. There she is, the lovely and talented Dr. Joan S. Let's see, Michelle Grant. They used to do that here in Kansas. Yep, drawn and quartered. CC Jones, where my Megalodon. Right there, friend. Padrita Pebbles. Now, Padrita, also known as Lotta Guerin. Lotta sang the most beautiful Brazilian song in the our final karaoke moment. It's like, where do you go after that? That was it. That was the capstone. It was so good. Good to see you, Padrita, aka Lotta. Cheryl makes a great observation here. We are all being torn apart emotionally in many ways. It's true. Steve Borg, resistance. We're living in an enemy country right now. It can't happen soon enough for me. Astro Emotion says, a challenging time for more growth. How much more challenging do we need? And what kind of growth are we going to get out of it? Like, what's the growth do we get out of it? That's an interesting question. Wendy Eater, what's going on, Wendy? Good to see you. Hope to see you next year. Let's see, who else do we have? Bonnie Willow. How about people being emotionally and energetic? That's all part of it, right? That's all part of it. That's why I brought it up. LMM, there's going to be a far right backlash. That's been in the plan. That's been in the works. You know, you just look at everything that's happening, where the setup is swinging hard back to the right. And I was watching, I watch Black Pigeon Speaks. You ever see that guy? I like him. He got banned a bunch of times. And he talked about the movie Starship Troopers. And, it's so funny. Sometimes people will do videos and they'll talk about things that I've thought about. And I started reading Starship Troopers when I was in junior high school. And one of the things about Starship Troopers, written by Robert Heinlein, is that the only people that could vote were people that had been conscripted to military service, whether you had made a sacrifice for the Republic, and you're the only person that could vote. You're the only person that had a say. Now, you didn't have to do that. You could be a civilian, and you could have a life, and you could do things, and you could make money, but you had no voice in the government. That you didn't have a voice. So he was talking about how the Heinlein version of government could theoretically save the United States. Like, I wouldn't really have a problem with that, right? Because then you have a stake in the game. You have some skin in it once you do something like that. But then at the end, he said something, and I've thought about this for a while, and I'm not even sure if it's Donald Trump, although Donald Trump will enter into our discussion tonight, that America is going to have its Caesar. And I think that that's probably true, because, we've been talking about this for a while, and all of this just crazy, hardcore madness that's emerged from the left and forcing all these people over to the right. And not only that, but looking for anyone who has a modicum of power to restore order. And that won't come from the left. That'll come from the right. And it will come from the hard right. And I've talked about this before, with this whole idea and the notion of the theocracy. And over the past week, you've had Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene coming out, giving speeches, and both of them, talking up their allegiance to God and being Christians, and this idea that there would be a Christianized theocratic state. Don't rule that out. I mean, that is definitely in the air, right? It's definitely in the air. So I feel, I'm of a couple minds when it comes to this, because I think the democracy we have is absolute wreck. Whatever you want to call it, representative republic, or, whatever the thing was that the founding fathers put together, this is not it. I can tell you right now, this is not it. So we're living in a very different political franchise right now, and it gets people to think about strong men. It gets people to think about the Mussolinis of the world, who, by the way, compared to Stalin or Mao, is like the harsh principal of the high school you went to, or something like. I mean, he wasn't. Mussolini was a tough guy. He's a Leo, but he was nothing like Stalin or Mao. Nothing. So I'm of the mindset that maybe, and again, I'm not voting for an American Caesar. I really want people to be able to be interdependent and have way, 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 way less government in our lives. Way less government. But usually what happens is, problem, reaction, solution. So just look around at the problems now. Drag queen story hour and the grooming of our children. And I took another swipe at James Lindsay today, and he was, giving yet another dissertation on Paulo Freire and Freireanism. And he makes just a compelling case that the entire education system has been completely hijacked by the free Aryans. I mean, it's like it's over. They won. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I highly suggest you hunt down James Lindsay's channel, The New Discourses. And if you're going to listen to anything, just listen to his dispatches on Paulo Freire. Because not only does Freire wind up impacting education, but also religion. So you're killing two birds with one stone with Paulo Freire. And so when you look at things like that, you look at, I was watching Matt Walsh yesterday, who's entertaining. And basically he says, I have no problem jailing these drag queens at Drag Queen Story Hour. No problem at all, because they're doing things that in many cases are law breaking. I mean, there was one where I think it seems like a lot of this shit happens in Texas, but there was this one it's not even drag queen. They've moved out of the libraries now, right? Or the Barnes and Noble. They're at the bars now. That's where they are. They're at the bars and the clubs, and they're bringing the kids in. And there was one where I guess one of the drag queens wasn't wearing any underwear, and his junk was flopping around, right? So, I mean, that's lewd and lascivious behavior. They were ready to throw Jim Morrison in prison for something like that. And they weren't even sure if it was his schlong or his middle finger or whatever. I mean, it's, they're ready to throw him in prison. And yet, these creatures get an upgrade and get to go to another club and, a bigger audience and more value, right? Theoretical, economic value. So, yeah, it's a very interesting problem, reaction, solution path that we've put in. And I can easily see, a turn to the hardcore right. And that gets into, by the way, some of the stuff we'll talk about with Ben Shapiro and Kanye West, because I'm going to get into that tonight. They both are in the news, and kind of a conflict going on. And astrologically, Mars oppositions, Mars in Taurus and Mars in Scorpio. You'll see that when I bring the charts up. And it's very interesting when you talk about something like, like being a Zionist and a nationalist. So you can be a Zionist and you can be a nationalist because, well, that's what Israel does, right? It sort of sets the standard in the bar for theoretically the United States. Well, if they can do it, well, why can't we do it? Why do you think so many people on the right align themselves with Israel and the Zionists? Sure, there's political power involved, but it also aligns with this idea of nationalism, because if it's one thing that's clear is that nobody tells Israel what the fuck to do, because they run their own version of their nation state, whether you agree with them or not, right? Whether you agree with them or not, nobody tells them what to do. They make the rules of engagement, and they have a nationalist theocratic state. Well, it's part theocratic and part ideological, because the Zionists aren't always aligned with the, how shall we say, more mystical or traditional aspects of Judaism. Theodore Herzl, I don't believe, was an Orthodox rabbinical adherent, but he was clearly the head of the Zionist Congress. All right, so let's get back into some comments here. It's a good comment. What else do we have? My chief, Anulani, jails now is business. That's for sure. So the prison complex, the prison industrial complex has been going on for a while. And they're starting to divest themselves a little bit of that model by letting prisoners out, which has been all part of this, reform and letting the scofflaws back onto the street. But make no mistake about it, the prison industrial complex is huge. And Kamala Harris was a pretty significant contributor to putting a lot of people in prison in California that had no reason to be there. A lot of them were just there for their, their cannabis violations. And maybe it was the third time they got busted for something and happened to be on cannabis. And that was it. They were done. California, 3 strikes, you're out, right? So the prison industrial complex really shows up around 1990, right around that era. And it has become a huge, huge, huge business. But now the whole idea of the prisons are, they don't need prisons anymore. Your home has become a prison. Your schools have become a prison. Your supermarkets have become prisons, right? The whole idea of the prison itself has, exploded and manifested into the mainstream, right? That's what's happened. So, and that's, people are prisoners in their own body now. I mean, look at the impact of the carjack. Terrible. People are prisoners in their body. For a lot of these people, there's no hope. We'll get into that a little bit later. Okay, let's see. Who else do we have? Veronica's Barn. Let's see. Welcome, Veronica's Tinfoil Tiara. Exactly what needs to happen. So politicians, so you guys are tapping into this pitchforks and torches energy that I'm talking about, which is coming. It's coming. The next 90 days, once we get into the Mars retrograde and Gemini's pitchforks and torches, and you can feel it. You can just feel it everywhere. It's bubbling up. People have had enough. The receipts are starting to come in with people who had been coerced to get carjacked, and it's horrific. I keep reading about young people now. I just read about another college football player who passed away. Horrific. And they're starting to show, terrible abnormalities with young people, 5, 6 years of age, women, young girls who are starting to have periods. It's just horrible. Absolutely horrible. And then, of course, we had the ruling of the CDC 15-0 last week to have this included into the vaccination schedule. And people are not happy. They're not happy. And that gets into a whole other discussion about these so-called world leaders. By the way, I think most of the world leaders are probably replacement models at this point. That's what I think. I don't think they're around. And some people say they've been arrested, and I don't know about that. But what I do know is that they're probably not even human at this point, and they're just carrying out orders. There's no conscience with any of them. So, and why is that? Because it's an anticipation of the torches and pitchfork moment. All right, who else do we have? Always hated the dunking chairs. What, at the carnivals? Oh, I love those, especially if I was throwing the balls. I was quite good at that. The sadist in me really enjoyed that. Let's see, who else do we have? Since the Scorpio will be my 4th house. Let's see, who else do we have? My Cherie Analone. There's some new people here. Ivan Langley. Hey, Ivan, good to see you. Lady Virgo in the house. Separate, divide, and conquer. That's been going on for a while. You're right. Always works. Christina Owen chimes in. We just a good old psychological quartering these days. Divine Light Hazel. Hi, Divine Light Hazel. Tough as nails. Gotta like that name. Generate, order, destruct. The social contract fading into the sunset. This is one time where I think I might out black pill Christine. Social contract is done, shattered, a million pieces. It's over. Social contract is over. Amy Gill. Yes, they'd go in and take over homes. That's right. No, we can't allow that. We'll be hunting and ending those animals as humanly as possible. Hey, Steve Letro, good to see you. We got back-to-back Steves. Steve Letro and Steve Borg Resistance. Cato in the house. Hi, Cato. Oswald Spangler, good to see you. Let's see. Who else? Mickey King. Hi, Mickey. Nice to see you here. I wanted to reply to your comment from Friday's show, and I think I will. I just haven't yet. What does it mean? The big X. I've been talking about it. Big X is the quartering of the country, right? We have the country. Now we're going to quarter. The country's going to be quartered. It's the balkanization of the United States. That's what the big X means. I mean, there's also other potentiality because that eclipse, runs along the New Madrid fault line. And if you believe that eclipses have geomagnetic effects on the environment, and there was one eclipse, what was it, 1996, 97, maybe a little bit earlier. It went right across Iran, and it was a massive earthquake. Like hundreds of thousands of people have died during that earthquake. So yeah, I mean, sometimes eclipses can be related to actual events that occur in the environment. And I've just been noticing that one for a long time as it relates to the New Madrid fault line. Who else? T Energies is here. Yeah, David and Brian were great. Absolutely. Harriet Bowie mentioning all those close to my orbit to check their Mars placement for this upcoming retrograde. Good idea. Elizabeth, she was there. She loved the event. You were having a good time. Elizabeth, one of the few people got up, actually sang a yacht song, by the way. Earth, Wind, and Fire, border yacht, but still yacht. I was proud of her. Leaf Dragseth. Leaf was there. Good to see you, Leaf. What's going on, brother? Kabuki Theater. Hi, Bo. La, la, la. It's back. It's the backside of the Janus Gate. We entered during Trump, the American eclipses. Good call. Cyber Sully. These things are getting crazier by the day at an ever increasing rate. The acceleration is off the charts. Really off the charts. Pedrita says Apocalypto. I own it. I own the DVD. I've seen it so many times. It's a spectacular movie in terms of the set, the acting. It's so real, and the message is incredible. It's an incredible message. I highly recommend Apocalypto. In Apocalypto, they closed the Planned Parenthood when they saw the eclipse. That's funny, Tondar. That's pretty funny. Lisa Wolf says, definitely need to book a reading with, but I'm wishing. Hey, I'm open the next few weeks. Pretty open. So I'm open for business. Dawn, it saves him. It does save him. That's right. Absolutely. Will the Beast. What's going on, Will? All right. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to play a little song, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to play the song. I think it's really fucking funny, and we need to lighten things up a little bit, and then we're gonna get into the meat of the show. Oh, before I do that, I got to give a shout out to our sponsor, which is True Hemp Science. And my buddy Chris, where are we? And then I'm going to play a tune, then we come back. Let's do this. Now, I mentioned this on my other show. Chris sold out of all of his product while he was at our event. Not all of it, but everything he brought, he sold out. It was incredible. And the big hit, of course, has been the moon dust. So let me just go in here. And some people bought some CBD for their pets, also known as pet sounds. So there's some pet sounds right there. We got oil. He's got oils, water soluble, the edibles. The gummies should be coming back. And Chris numbers everything. So when you find something you like, you just remember the number. That's all you've got to do. Just remember the number. The numbers have specific and key elements associated with them. So here's the deal. If you go to truehempscience.com/ref/23 and you order $100 worth of product, Chris sends you some free product. And if you get $150, you get free shipping. And there's plenty of good stuff to choose from. And they're always there and available to answer all of your CBD questions, without a doubt. All right, let me tee up the song. Let me play it. It's funny as hell. Okay. Make sure I get the right one. Oh, that's not it. Hold on. Here it is. Okay. It's 2 minutes and 40 seconds. We need a little break here, a little humor after the opening heaviness. When I come back, we'll get into the chart of the moment and start to break down the rest of the show.
To get into the Illuminati, cause we want to get invited to the coolest parties by subtly communicating hidden symbology. Soon we'll be part of a secret society.
Hollywood will open up its doors for us. We'll meet the inner circle of executives.
We'll give a guy a wristy in a warm jacuzzi, and the guy will put us in a Disney movie.
Then they'll play our music on MTV. We'll be given designer clothes for free.
And we can drive everywhere DUI, cause we'll be under the protection of the all-seeing eye.
And we'll never have to worry about bills again, cause the Rockefeller family will be our best friends.
We'll fuck a squirrel and finger a fish, and triangle, eye, pyramid. You can be rich and famous too.
I love the establishment. Yay! We want to get into the Illuminati, and we want to hang out with Jay-Z and Beyonce.
We want to sell our souls in 1 billion records and bow before our reptilian overlords.
The neon-lightened few will bring us into the fold,
where we'll be told secrets of old,
like why the CIA killed JFK,
and why on earth the moon landing was fake.
Being Illuminati will be so much fun. We'll learn the truth about Area 51.
They'll tell us where Flight MH370 is and which politicians like to fuck kids.
We'll get 1 million followers on Instagram. We'll have the whole wide world in our hearts.
The Rothschilds will take us to Bohemian Grove, where it's likely that we'll both be murdered and cloned.
Let's manipulate the economy.
War is good for humanity. We'll be given the keys to unlock the Bible, and we'll become Lucifer's loyal disciples. We'll pray to Baphomet and the princes of hell.
We'll bathe in pig's blood and cut ourselves
under the blood moon, beneath Saturn's radiant energy, before the Dark Lord Lucifer himself. I invoke the 4 crowned princes of hell, inviting the forces of darkness to bestow their knowledge and power upon me. I, your faithful servant, promise to hide triangles in things, perform at the Grammys and tell people the earth is round. From this day forth, I'll do whatever it takes to thwart globalism, multinational corporations, the establishment, and the military-industrial complex. I love fracking, it's the best. Let's go for some pizza.
What flavor?
Kitty flavor. We're gonna get assassinated for making this video.
More like initiated.
Illuminati. That's the Bondy hipsters. A little bit of humor to lighten things up a bit. Let's take a little deep breath here. All right, why don't we get into the chart of the moment, and then we'll move into the meat of the show. Did you guys like that? Was that funny? That's good stuff, huh? I mean, the amazing thing about that show is they hit everything. I mean, everything. I don't think they left one thing out of that whole kind of Illuminati mix. 2 minutes and 42 seconds, pure genius. All right, let's get into the chart of the moment, and we'll dive into that. Let's find out where we are. And let's do this. Let's do this. I think I have it set for Chicago, but it's okay. It's close enough. Well, we know what to expect this week. On the 25th, we have the eclipse. That's all coming. Right. So astrology is strategy. That's how maybe we can look at astrology in general. Is astrology a strategy? And with a sense of knowing what might be coming down the pipeline without being completely omniscient. We can begin to plan, and we can begin to set our intention. The thing that I think is really important when you interact with astrology is to not come from a place of fear. I mean, I think it's important for anything. And one of the things that I've been on a mini crusade with astrology is to take some of the fatalistic energy out of it. You know, there's a whole group of young astrologers and people that are really interested in astrology coming up. And, you know, I see some of these Mercury retrograde memes, and they're, you know, they're chock full of like events or self-fulfilling prophecies, right? And we all need to be on our toes. But, you know, my experience with a lot of these astrological transits is that you have to be clear, and you can't allow them to have a huge amount of space inside of who you are. A case in point, we go back to the Uranus-Mars true note conjunction a few months back, and everybody was just signaling, well, that's the end of the world. That's nuclear war. That's doom. And I'm like, well, let's, you know, slow the roll on it a little bit. Let's take a look at this and really try to understand what we're talking about here. And, you know, my take on that was that it is not the end of the world. It's not going to be the end of the world. And we're going to navigate through it and find things that are going to be, you know, meaningful for us. It's exactly what happened. So even when we go into a period like eclipses, you know, we have to integrate them in a way where we're not completely detached, but we're also not subsumed by this subjective reality of these things that are going to happen. Unfortunately, the world that we're living in right now really seems to have loaded the deck, right? Like, you know, I can't tell you how many websites I've gone to and talked and seen that Putin's moved all of his people into underground shelters, and you know that they're talking about, you know, setting off a bomb in Ukraine to you know, bait the United States in so that the United States goes full blown, you know, hardcore troops on the ground, missiles, war, nuclear retaliation. With all that stuff is in the air right now. All this Cold War energy is in the air right now. So it's easy to be fearful, and everybody's kind of, you know, on their toes right now. And I think the worst part of it all are the bad actors that have set it all up. That's the worst part of it all, are these bad actors. Anyway, so let's try to navigate this week ahead. With the Mars stuff, I can't get out of it, right? I can't get out of what I'm seeing with the Mars stuff because it's already happening. Some of it's good, by the way, and I'll show you at a certain point. So let's get into this. We start off this week, and not only are we going to have Mars retrograding on the 31st, which I think is at what, like 28 degrees, but it's going to be in a wide square with Neptune. And we have that Mars-Neptune square, and Jupiter is at 0 Aries, and it's part of the retrograde path going back into Pisces. So what happens when you bring Jupiter and Pisces together? The imagination becomes huge, for better or for worse. I mean, you can have great visions with the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in Pisces. And you can also have hellish nightmares. I mean, that's the nature of Pisces. You know, Pisces is the root and the fruit, right? It is Malkuth to Kether, right? Heaven and hell. So you have, you know, all this variance with Pisces, and we have a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction. Oftentimes it is the specter of the thing versus the thing itself that is actually the the image or the the imago that has power over you, right? And then with a Mars square, what do? We make things bigger. We make things bigger and we give our power away. And the last thing you want to do with a Mars square is to give your power away. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. Trust me. And it's easy to do, especially if the systems around you begin to disassemble and they begin to collapse. And they're collapsing. There's no two ways about it. I mean, every time I go to the grocery store, I'm just stunned by how little I buy and how much it costs. I just, I shake my head and just go, well, it's the cost of doing business now, right? And I don't know if you saw that we had now we have the embargo on crab. Isn't that interesting? We have an embargo on crab. Oh, there's no more crab now. You know what? And there's plenty of crab. They're just putting an embargo on it. And what's happened to the crab is that these massive, fleets that go up there into Alaska and fish, they're really looking for one fish, and that's haddock. And the reason they farm fish haddock is because that's the fish they use for the fish sandwiches at McDonald's and Burger King and all these other places. And they have these giant nets, and all they care about is the haddock. They don't care about the crab or the shrimp and all that stuff. Then it doesn't get tossed back, and they don't even process that stuff. Believe it or not, they're just there for the haddock. So a lot of this has to do with the fact that they are just kind of overfishing for one particular fish. And I know this because I read it on a message board with a person who's from Alaska and does this sort of thing, right? But that's even like a Mars square Neptune and Jupiter retrograde. Oh my God, we're not going to be able to get any crab anymore. What did I do? I bought some fucking crab last night at the grocery store. They usually have these crab legs that they wind up putting in a bag, and they're a little bit less than what they normally sell them for. So I bought a couple bags of crab legs and I stuck them in the freezer. So that's part of it, but you really want to watch out for where you're putting your energy, in the coming weeks, because this Mars is going to go retrograde. Jupiter's going to go retrograde. So, be careful of what you imagine. Be careful of what grabs your attention. Also, and I've talked about this personally with charts, Mars Neptune squares in a natal chart are indicative of addiction, some kind of addiction. I've seen it again and again and again and again and again with Mars Neptune squares. So when we go through a time of stress, right, we all get addicted to something. And even information is an addiction. And with Mars Gemini, I mean, my God, we've been, just absolutely foraging for information at, the speed of sound, really. I just, I'm in the mix. Most people I know, they're just doing everything in their power to try to find as many missing pieces as possible. And so that's really picked up with Mars and Gemini. With the retrograde, it might be good to slow that process down or reverse it. Maybe it'd be a good time to read a book. How about that? Books are longer form version. Books are ruled by Sagittarius, which rules publishing. Gemini rules the writing component. So maybe during this Mars retrograde, it might be a good time for you to spend less time on the computer and more time actually touching some pages. Think about that for a moment. You also may want to look at maybe buying some more books. There's no guarantee. And I've talked to a number of people. I've had Howdy McCoskey on my show. We talked about this. Get books you like. There's no guarantee. I hate to say this, right? In the material world right now, there are no guarantees. There are no guarantees, except there will be change. That's the one thing we can all agree upon. And will the change ultimately lead us to something that flushes this system out? Based on what I know and understand and intuit, the answer to that is yes. But it's not going to be instant, and it won't be overnight. And some of us may not even be here for when that happens. But we're in a 20-year cycle that started in 2020, and that cycle consummates in 2040. So you may want to find some things that you want to hold on to. We also have right now an inconjunct with Mars Pluto. And, when we get into inconjuncts, they're tricky because Pluto is going to feed into our obsessions. And with the Mars in Gemini is so mercurial, and it's so reactive, immutable. And again, it's sort of like waiting for the hammer to drop. Pluto's the hammer. This is where we are with the inconjunct. It's also trying to figure out where the power is. Where's the power? Who's got the power? Where's the power in my own life? Am I powerless? What do I have power to change? What do I have power to accept? What do I have power to surrender? So this Mars in conjunct with Pluto, this is going to be going on for a while. This goes right up to the retrograde on the 31st. And then, of course, it goes through the retrograde pattern, and that inconjunct is still there. And we're also dealing with things like power, just power, like power, light, heat, energy, power grids. We talked about that 2 weeks ago when I was talking about the eclipse on midterm night, and how that whole eclipse area just, takes place over the western part of the United States. And I'm thinking, if they were going to really fuck with this election, all those states are tied together in the same grid. And that would be a very convenient way to impact an election by hacking the grid, right? So again, we're dealing with issues around power. Pluto is always about power. So Mars is playing a key role here. We also have the trine going on with Mercury. So that's really good for your head. Like, you can learn a lot with a Mercury Mars trine. Mars is going retrograde until another 8 days. And you can, Mercury's moving ahead and getting closer and closer into more of an exact trine there. Right. Oh, this is the chart for the event. What am I doing? Chart of the moment. What am I doing here? Hold on. This is the event chart. My bad. Let me go back. Why is that there? That shouldn't have been there. I just noticed that. My apologies, kids. It says Naples, Florida. Let me do this. Hold on. Let me go back in here. Yeah, that's it. October 23rd. Says event chart. Okay. No, that's the right chart. It's not, I had a chart for the event, and that's not it. Let me go back. I apologize. And I have it set for Naples, Florida. I don't know why. So all you East Coasters, this is your chart, but it's close. It's close enough, right? There's the sun, 0 Scorpio. We've just entered into Scorpio. Here's Venus, Sun-Venus conjunction. That's a powerful conjunction. Very, very powerful conjunction. That's like a mating and friends for life kind of conjunction. And normally when you get into Scorpio and Capricorn, they work well together, earth and water, but because mathematically it's just really coming out of the final degrees of Libra. So now we have a square. And in terms of relationships for the coming week, those could be real power struggles because Scorpio doesn't budge, right? Scorpio is like my way or the highway. That's how it works here. And the square with Pluto is very intense. Like this is an interesting dynamic for the week ahead, for sure. And of course, we're going to come up on that new moon. The moon right now is balsamic in Libra. And so we're fading out here with this really kind of balanced and fair ability to kind of assess where we are. And it's almost like letting go. letting go of, this equanimity. Because when we go into the eclipse mode, when that moon moves into Scorpio, sun will be at 2 degrees, moon will be at 2 degrees. There's no equanimity about that. There's no equanimity. It's sort of like, okay, we're moving into this depth and this intensity. By the way, Venus will still be there too. So you have the sun, moon, right? Venus, all in Scorpio, and part of this eclipse coming up on the 25th. And it reminds me of like somebody who comes into like a shamanic moment, like somebody, not that I've done a lot of these things, but I've done a few of them. A lot of people are way more experienced in this realm, right? But it's kind of like before you go into like a plant ceremony or medicine session or something like that. And, there's a before and there's an after. And the before is usually kind of like the moon in Libra. You're coming in, you're kind of balanced, right? Your world is working. You're able to kind of navigate to where you needed to get to in order to get there. And then you go down, and then you go into the underworld, and things aren't as balanced anymore, right? Things are, you've stepped into the deep. And that's what this moon and this eclipse is about, coming out of this moon in Libra. We'll still have Mercury in Libra. So we'll still be able to theoretically make some sense, right? Like in the back of all of this, when we see this on the eclipse chart, there's that Libran mind that can kind of sort things out and balance out the intensity. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So one of the things that I would suggest as a strategy for this eclipse, whatever happens, right, it's almost like whatever happens, you have to be really in it, because with Scorpio, you can't get out of it. You're in it. But there's also a part of you as the observer who can look at the thing that's happening. Because that's Mercury behind the sun, right? Mercury's behind the sun. It's behind the moon. It's behind Venus. Sitting back there and has the ability to be equanimous. That's the word that I would use, right? It's the witness to everything that's happening. And even in the beginning of the week, right, Mercury will be in a closer trine with Mars. So there's even some potential to act, there's even potential to act. So you might get some deep insight into your life during this eclipse. If that's the case, I wouldn't waste any time on acting, because you have this gateway with Mercury and Mars that allows you to make changes very, very quickly. And it's tough because, the moon in Scorpio is very intense and emotional. All these Scorpio planets are very emotional. And Mercury in Libra and Mars and Gemini are mental energies. You just don't want to be motivated by fear. Come right back to that Mars square. So what's going to motivate you? What's going to motivate you is whatever you allow yourself to experience in a deep way with this eclipse energy, right? And then step back and have the ability to witness it, to see it. Right? There may be something that might be a part of your family, because there's a lot of family energy with the sun moon conjunction, Venus and the relationship with the family. You might just step back from it and be the witness and go, you know what? That's not my stuff. That's not mine. And I've experienced this intensity, but that's not my stuff. And I may need to do something different. There's nothing wrong with that. So there's some adaptability here. Even with the eclipse energy, there's adaptability. We're in grand trine territory tonight with Mercury and Mars and Saturn. And, we had some of that grand trine energy at the event too. It was great. Really great. So we were kind of riding this thermal, that, it just took you straight up at the event. And it's still around. This thermal is still around, but we know something's coming, or we know something's happening. And are these two things mutually exclusive? Can you ride this current? Well, you also know that something big is coming down, and something big is coming, whether it's the eclipse or the second eclipse or this Mars retrograde. We are in it now. And I'll get into some of that Mars retrograde energy and my take on it. But I like, as long as you can stay out of the fear zone and don't allow your heightened imagination to get the best of you here, and try to really do your best to not try to escape. This is bad escape energy right here. This Mars, Jupiter, Neptune square, bad escape energy. Watch what you're putting in your body. And it doesn't always have to be, you could have an information escape too. Shit, I do that all the time. Sometimes I think I'm addicted to information. That's an escape. So, watch where your escapes are. Sometimes, things that you don't think are all that bad for you, might be just another form of addiction, and you can escape into it. So you have to be really clear about that. To me, that's Mercury, playing the witness role over here. You can step back and watch. You know what? I'm going to choose a different path. I'm going to fork off and have a different way. I remember a long time ago, like I've talked about this period of my life where I went through this big transformation. And one of the things that happened to me is my girlfriend, she left me for this woman. Right. And I kind of knew this was happening. It was I think it was like 1920. Anyway, the whole thing blew up. And then she confirmed, of course, that she wound up, having an affair with this woman. She was in love with her. I'm like, okay, well, you got to do what you got to do. And so then I went off on my path, and I really started to grow. Like it was amazing. It was an amazing time. And I remember getting this phone call from her, and it was her expressing regret. And she wanted to reconnect and start the relationship again. And it was a real test because there was a part of me that was so used to being with her and having fun with her. But the bigger test was for me to disappoint her and to say no. And I knew it wasn't the right thing to do. I said, I'm sorry. I can't do that. And it broke my heart to tell her that, because I knew that she was lonely, and she'd ultimately been rejected by this woman who could not accept the fact that she'd strayed outside of her comfort zone to, have a love relationship with somebody of the same sex. So she was rejected, and she wanted to come back to me. And I didn't say no because of that. I just knew that it wasn't right. So this is kind of what we're talking about here. That you might have a choice to do something that might feel familiar. Let's say somebody says, hey, would you like that job back that you had before COVID? Or and you're like, oh, gee, I could really use that money. Think twice about it, right? Think about how much you've grown and what you've gone through. Some of that energy is in the air here. And tonight, as we talk, we have this inconjunct, this yod going on with Uranus and Neptune and Mercury, which is, quite interesting. To me, this is a yod of revelation, because in the back end over here, the dream wants to make itself known, right? The dream wants to make itself known, and Uranus wants to make itself known right now. So pay attention to your dreams tonight if you're watching the show. That's an interesting time for sure. And one of the things that I don't think we've actually talked about, maybe enough in some ways, is the Uranus-Pluto trine. And Uranus is retrograding, so it's getting kind of, separating from Pluto. But there is and has been this energy of transforming and building something new in the earth plane. And I think with Uranus retrograde, we're looking at what doesn't work. We're looking at all the craziness. We're looking at body modification and what we put in our bodies. And that's going to be a big part of what I talk about with the Mars retrograde. So there you go. That's the chart of the moment. It's a lot more solid, even though there's not a lot of Earth in there. With the Grand Trine, with Mars and Saturn, Moon, it's a lot more solid than you may think. And, this is a time where I think you can have some really good conversations over the next 48 hours, essential conversations. All right, that's the chart of the moment. Let's talk Mars, since we're on the subject. You see how I'm transitioning? We're going all over the place, but we're having these nice transitions. So I found an image for Mars retrograde. And ironically enough, it comes out of everyone's most prophetic cartoon show, The Simpsons. Of course, The Simpsons would have an image of torches and pitchforks. Of course they would. So why am I bringing this up? Why is torches and pitchforks a theme for the next 90 days? There's a reason. And I'll show you. This is something I stumbled upon, and I've talked about it before. So Mars goes retrograde on the 31st of October. So that's 10/31, right? And it goes direct on January 13th, which is Friday the 13th. So what do we have in our cultural symbology? We have, two of the three greatest horror franchises of the 20th and 21st century. You have Halloween, you have Friday the 13th, and then you have Nightmare on Elm Street, right? So these are the two that really key into what we're talking about. Mars retro on Halloween, Mars direct on, and then even the numbers are interesting because we have 1031 and then we have 113. So the 31 is an inversion of the 13. We have the 10 and the 1. So there's some interesting number symbolism going on here. And, roughly this 90-day period, it's a little more than, so let's see, we got, November, December, right? That's 60. So it's somewhere in the 90 day zone, right? And if you go all the way out to where Mars goes ultimately direct at the degree that it went retrograde at, that's pushes it out closer to the 90-day mark. But this period between Mars retrograde and Mars direct, I think, is very intense because we have the symbology, right? We have the symbology of these two horror franchises, and Mars playing a very, very significant role. And that's why I came up with the theme of torches and pitchforks. So we're going to look at the Mars retrograde chart and bring that up here. And what I mean by that. So this is what Mars will look like at 25 degrees retrograde. And you can see the hard square. I mean, it's almost a mirror in some ways of the chart that we just looked at, although a bit different. The moon is in a different place. Mercury's already transited into Scorpio by then. But we still have that square going on with the retrograde. And when we think of, again, when we think of Pisces, we think, Pisces can be heaven and hell. Pisces can be sublime and horrific. When you go into cinema is Piscean. When you go to a movie theater, you go into the 12th house because you're going to a place where other people just don't go. And it is the projection of the life dream onto the screen, right? That's what movies are about. And even cinema itself, which is celluloid back in the old days, is it's a petroleum process. And it comes out of this whole world of gel and petroleum and frames and all that stuff, right? So Pisces cinema movies are Piscean, and they run the gamut from great love stories, adventure stories, comedies, horror stories, and everything in between. And so we're entering into a period that is bookended by these two horror movies. And we have the Mars retrograde, where a lot of people's imaginations will take hold of them during this period of time. And I looked at, we'll get into this in a bit. I looked at where the true node was in Gemini at that degree, and that was September of 2020, if I'm not mistaken. And I'll go through that timeline. It's almost all COVID, right? It's all COVID during that time. I mean, it's crazy when you go back and you look at, I'll pull it up here in a second, but it's all COVID with a smattering of the smoldering fires of the summer of Floyd. So what's happening now? People are dropping like flies. And now you're having more and more doctors come forward. And now they're starting to spill the beans. This stuff is starting to come out. It's coming out. And this is the torches and the pitchforks. This is where people have had enough. Now, we haven't even gotten into the economic stuff. We haven't even gotten into the housing stuff, which seems like it's about to go off the cliff. David and I were talking a little bit about that today. And just how the housing market in places like California is even starting to collapse. And I mentioned this on my show. I think it was maybe Thursday, and I was talking about how states like Louisiana, Missouri, like they're pulling out of BlackRock. They're divesting themselves of BlackRock. And they say it has to do with the ESG stuff. I think it's deeper than that. Although I think it's good that they're making a stand with ESG. BlackRock basically makes states, companies, corporations adhere to their ESG score. The ESG score is, I believe, environmental, social, and gender, right? That's what ESG stands for. So if you hit their ESG marks, you'll get a good rating, which means you can get a loan. You can get cheaper money than a company that's not hitting those marks, right? This is what it's about. But I think it's also deeper because BlackRock started buying all kinds of residential property in 2020. I bet I could go to somebody in chat randomly and ask them if somebody called them up and wanted them to see if they wanted to sell their house. Randomly. Somebody did that to me one time. An Asian woman. Imagine that. But that's what BlackRock, it wasn't just BlackRock, Vanguard was doing, all these companies were doing it. But the reason why BlackRock was doing it was because they were taking those, buying those homes, many of which are empty, by the way. Many of them are still empty. But what they were doing is they were amortizing those homes and putting them in these pension packages, because real estate at that time was, skyrocketing. It was on steroids. So they put them in these pension packages, and they'd get these pension managers. And they would say, "Hey, look, we got this package over here, and it's all residential real estate, and we've bought, hundreds of thousands of residential real estate, these homes, and we're holding them. Some of which we're working on kind of a subdivision rental thing, whatever their fucking plan was, right? But we know that it's going up, and it's going up 13, 14, 15%. Some areas 20, 25% through the roof, and you're looking at inflation 8, 9, 10%. So you always stay ahead of the game with a package like this in your pension. Well, they're lying, right? They're lying because the bottom will fall out in the real estate market. So let's say you're one of these hapless pension managers who succumbs and buys this thing and comes back and says, "Hey, look, we got this thing from BlackRock, and it's going to insulate our people so that while inflation is going through the roof, we've hedged it with this package from BlackRock, and we're going to make more money." Well, what happens when the bottom drops out of the housing market? They're holding on to those pensions, that package, and that portfolio goes into the minus territory. And all these people who are hoping like hell that their pensions are being managed accordingly lose up to half of their, that's not including the 401k stuff. That's just, gone out the window over the last, 2 years? People have lost like 25% of their 401ks, which is horrible. Well, if this thing happens, this is the coup de grace. So then, what happens? Well, the pension funds are wiped out. The people holding the pensions are wiped out. But guess who still owns the property? It's BlackRock. So they're not holding. BlackRock is not holding the risk. They're not holding the risk at all. The risk is on the holders of the pension funds. They still have the properties. They still have the paper, but they've indemnified themselves against the risk. This is why states like Louisiana, Missouri are divesting from BlackRock. They don't want any part of this, because even if they didn't have their managers go in and manage those pensions and buy those packages, you don't think there won't be a ripple effect through BlackRock? Sure, there will be. But BlackRock will never, they won't get hit. They've indemnified themselves. So that's going on right now, right? That's happening. We can see this. And what happens if that happens? More torches and pitchforks. So we have so many things right now where people, like Kanye West, who I'm going to talk about, is the Howard Beale of our time. Am I right? I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. He's Howard Beale. And you don't think Kanye is stoking the pitchfork and torch moment? Of course he is. Whether he's conscious of that or not, I don't know. But he's stoking it, right? So we have what's going on with the ongoing casualty list of the carjack. We have Rochelle Walensky and her criminal crew basically voting 15-0 to put the carjack into the vaccine schedule. And people are over it. They're over it. They're over it. Then we have the whole thing going on with England. I was going to get into Rishi Sunak's chart. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that tonight. I may not have the time. He's a Taurus, by the way. And his family is the 22nd richest family in England. I believe his wife's name is Murti. But if you look at her father, it's Murthy, and he comes out of Silicon Valley, and he's a huge Silicon Valley baron. And Rishi Sunak married into that family, and he met her while he was at Stanford. So they're the 22nd richest family in England. Think about that for a second. So this is the torches and pitchforks moment. We have all this Scorpio going on. Mercury's in Scorpio, Sun is in Scorpio. We're just coming off of the eclipse, right, which could set this whole thing off. And then we have that big square, and there's still that in conjunct with Mars Pluto, which I talked about. I feel like this, this is my feeling, is that people are out for blood. Like they've had enough. Like we're reaching that tipping point, right? We're reaching that tipping point. And once this thing starts to roll downhill, and I do think it's going to roll downhill, it's going to be very hard to stop it. The madness of crowds works both ways. And we saw the madness of crowds with the whole George Floyd, Summer of Floyd, right? But I really feel like this, even though we have all these other things going on, really feels to me like it's related to this degree of Gemini going back to September of 2020. So why don't we take a look at that from the timeline? You see how I'm being nice and like somewhat linear tonight? Got bridges, transitions. This is the new and improved version. Okay, so let's go back to so this is the events of September 2020. Wikipedia is always good for something. So, of course, the Afghanistan thing is still happening, right? We had the trial, the Charlie Hebdo stuff that never really impacted. But here we go. Economic impact of COVID-19 pandemic, COVID-19 recession. This is when Trump is president. Remember that. This is 2020. We haven't come to the election yet. And you could just look at everything. COVID-19 pandemic in Brazil, 9%, 0.7% decline of its gross domestic product, GDP. COVID-19 pandemic in Europe, COVID-19 pandemic in Germany. Face an unexpected V-shaped recovery. We got a decline, more decline. Prices soaring in the Eurozone. This is all happening 2 years ago. Litigation against McDonald's. Who cares? American social media service Facebook announces it may block Australian users from sharing both local and international news stories on its platform about the Australian government, and enact legislation to require technology companies to in the county to pay local news organizations. That's all COVID-related stuff. They didn't want people sharing information, okay? Health and environment, COVID-19 pandemic, North America, United States, in Iowa. We got a mask mandate, Ames, Iowa, 5-1. After New York Times named it as a hotspot. So that's all that happens. You just have to name the hotspot, and then there's a mask mandate. We got the pandemic in Belize, right? This is the heightened era of the pandemic. Am I right? I mean, this is just as Operation Warp Speed is getting ready to take off. And by October, Operation Warp Speed is rolling out. But we can see like everything, travel restrictions related to the pandemic. This is all pandemic. We had a shooting of Dijon Kizi in LA. I guess he was late to the BLM party. That one didn't really blow up, did it? All these things are happening here. Russian interference, 2020 United States elections. So they're saying that Facebook has discovered a Russian influence campaign based in St. Petersburg called Peace Data on the site, which targeted left-wing voters in the United States, United Kingdom by recruiting freelance journalists to write English language articles concerning domestic politics, racial and political tensions, and criticism President Donald Trump and his Democratic opponent, Joe Biden. So it looks like it's an equal opportunity disinformation program. We've got the pandemic in sports, the 2020 NFL season, Boko Haram insurgency. We have the Atlantic hurricane season, right? But it's all COVID-19 stuff. This is all September of 2020, travel restrictions. All these things are happening, right? You have this conflict going on between China and India on the border. We got Mike Pompeo announcing new. So this is, global surveillance disclosures. All these things are happening. You got the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. Remember that? That was one of those hot points. And, we're just really into the early part of September. I mean, look at all this. It's all COVID, 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 COVID. We got the killing of Daniel Prude. He was a fatal police encounter there. George Floyd protests in Portland starting to blow up. You had the Patriot Prayer Group, right? Remember that? That's all happening. This is all going on here. Somalian civil war. September is just racked with nothing but COVID. And what is the day? I think it's September. Let's go to the exact day of that. Really, it just starts off at the beginning of September and it goes all the way through the month of September. So we could just go all the way through September, just plow through. This is all 25 degrees true note stuff right here. You got Sudanese floods, but it's all really the COVID stuff. And all these cases that are showing up, supposedly, from all the tests, right? It wasn't deaths, it was cases. Now we have a lowering of the case rate. 9 vaccine companies signed a pledge they won't submit the vaccine candidates for review. So a lot of this also connects in with what's happening with Fauci and Psaki, because they're going to have to sit down, right? And they're going to have that just happened. They're not going to get out of being able to be questioned. And there were these terrible wildfires in Oregon. That was horrific. Absolutely horrific. These were wildfires that were started because the feds went in and defended the courthouse in Portland. And that was one of the areas where they could actually exercise some muscle. And, all these Antiphans went out and started these wildfires in Oregon. It was terrible. Widespread destruction, and people were dying, and just terrible stories coming out of all this, right? And you have more George Floyd stuff happening. This is all September. This is all that 25th degree. And then you have the Russian interference stuff in the background. You have the pound sterling being devalued during this time. That was 2 years ago. And we're still in that story. So a lot of this Mars retrograde is going to be a revisiting of a lot of these stories. September 11th, Friday, right? That's the anniversary of September 11th. COVID. Everything is just COVID, right? All this COVID stuff, armed attacks. There's a lot going on here. Boko Haram, which is a whole other thing. So when you go back and you look at that degree, we are really in the thick of the COVID stuff, and we're in the thick of the George Floyd stuff. And that's the degree that Mars is going retrograde on. And, when we look at Gemini, Mars was in Aries back then. And all the energy, right? All the pitchforks and torches that were out during that time were in the service of the Purple Revolution, which was the toppling of the statues and the burning of the cities. I had Steve Crimmy on my show, Steve and Chris, and Steve is getting ready to publish an excellent book about that period of time called Hermes Runs the Game. We talked a little bit about it on our show. You go to their website, logosophiabooks.com, and pre-order that book. It's going to be a coffee table book. And I highly recommend you get it, because it's going to be pretty much a compendium of everything that happened during that time and connecting it into other rituals as well, Greek rituals, Greek gods, connecting it up to the archetypal realm. So, those are the fires that were burning then. So when we go through Mars retrograde, it's a different version. And especially in Gemini, it's the flip side. So if we saw what was happening in the streets of America at that time, and even other parts of the world, this outward aggression, outward naked aggression against the system, and then the main theme at that time being George Floyd and the so-called racial injustice, and also COVID, those things are going to play a theme again during this Mars retrograde. But it's the other side of that story. It's the other side of that story. And I think these eclipses have a lot to do with part of that narrative, right? They have a lot to do with part of that narrative. And particularly when we get into some of the Ukrainian territory, like they're now proposing another $50 billion going to Ukraine. And no end in sight with the war. Zelensky has basically banned every single opposition party. So he's created a dictatorship. Talk about a fascist. I mean, not in the corporate sense, but in the pejorative sense. He's a tyrant. Zelensky's a tyrant. And, people are going to wake up to that fact here, because more and more money just keeps, being funneled over there. It's funny. I went through Amazon.com, and they have all these books on Zelensky. Like, fuck, this guy's got a lot of books written about him. But when you read the reviews, they're all lightweight. There's no real meat on the bones. And now he's giving like Tony Robbins, like inspirational fucking talks. And I think there's even one book on Amazon that kind of leans in that territory. Like, hey, if nothing can stop you when you really have your mind set to it, right? So just add all these things up. These are the receipts with this Mars retrograde. And remember, it happens between the 31st of Halloween, right? The 31st of October, Halloween, ends on Friday the 13th. And that period is, it's the American Horror Story. And that's when it all comes up, and people are going to be pissed. They're going to be pissed. And even with that Mars square to Jupiter and Neptune, and imaginations and fears are heightened, and potentially the madness of crowds, where once these things become unleashed, you can't put them back, right? So is there a way in which we can do this in a way that is more meaningful without the hysteria? This also gets into things like witch hunts, which are, remember, where did that American eclipse start? In 2017, started in Salem, Oregon. It was named after Salem, Massachusetts, where they had the first same. And I think there might have even been some connection between people from Salem, Massachusetts and Salem, Oregon. So that's where that started, right? That's where it started. So this is going to be an interesting time. And the righteous indignation will be thick and in the air. And if I were a public official, I would be nervous. I would be nervous, because at some point, we don't really know where that is, but I feel like it's going to be in this Mars retrograde. The receipts are going to hit critical mass. It's getting close. And usually when that happens, there's always some other event in the wings waiting to be activated to draw our attention away from the harm that's been done to us and the harm that we've allowed to be done to us. Because there's some consent involved here too, right? There wouldn't be any harm unless we consented to it, whether it's direct or indirect to us. So it's going to be a very interesting time. Now, I want to show you something which for me, when I look at astrology, I look at events that are in the world that to me are portentous. And I see them maybe in other ways that other people don't see them. So there's a story that surfaced last week in Houston, and I want to bring this up. It's a horrific story, actually. But it's a story that I think speaks to our time. And it has to do with twins. And since we're dealing with Mars and Gemini and the upcoming retrograde, I think this is a perfect story. Inside Texas House of Horrors, where cops say twins were brutally abused. So this is a really, really weird story. This just surfaced. And this is the home. It's outside of Houston. So in September, Zykia Duncan, 40, and her boyfriend, Jova Terrell, moved into a Texas neighborhood renting a 4-bedroom, 4-bathroom home for $4,200 a month. Okay, that's a lot of money. And while the newly built Houston area property seemed like the perfect place to raise a family, it became an alleged nightmare. According to New Court papers, Duncan and Terrell brutally abused her twins inside the home. Remember, they're twins. There's no telling exactly how long the alleged torture persisted. The two 16-year-old teenagers, made their daring escape early Tuesday in the middle of the night after they waited for Duncan and Terrell to fall asleep. They were allegedly handcuffed, but the boy had hid the key in his mouth, new court documents reveal. Running to a neighbor's home, they begged for help. The woman who took them in and wished to remain anonymous discovered the children severely malnourished. Their hands were so swollen, their poor hands were bigger than the rest of their bodies, the neighbor said in an interview with Good Morning America. The stories paint a picture of an alleged terror that strays far from the typical security of a family home. So it's all going on behind these walls. What the fuck is that? Human Ken doll, this LA bungalow for $1.99 million. Okay, that's just too weird. I don't want to get sidetracked. So this is the place. Now, this is after they cleaned it up, obviously, because now it's for rent or for sale. This is a fucking nice house. I mean, look at this place. I mean, it's a McMansion, but this is a nice place. Duncan and Terrell rented the 3,200 plus square foot home from residential development company Land Tejas, according to records obtained by the Post. Located in Cyprus, features of the 2-story property include a former living area, dining room, and an island kitchen, blah, 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 covered patio. The real estate agent on the listing told the Post that she only advertised the property for the builder and never met with Duncan or Terrell personally when they moved in a few weeks ago. So there they are. Okay. She's 40, he's 24. Lovely neighbors. So this is the place. This is a nice fucking place. Oh, and look where they get to go. Check that out. The community pool. They've got a, lazy river, and it's a pretty fucking nice house. Right? And, here's a hand to the kids. The not yet completed community known as Marvita features a neighborhood pool and a playground, but it's also where accounts of allegedly abusive family life have now emerged. The twins explained how they, along with their 5 siblings, so there's 7 kids, had allegedly been handcuffed, beaten, starved, kept naked, and forced to eat their own excrement. They were allegedly beaten with electrical cords, metal rods, and even forced to drink bleach as punishment. Additionally, they were forced to drink water from a supply valve in the washing machine and be coerced into taking up 24 Benadryl in order to sleep. Yes, please. Can you let us in, please? They're the handcuffs. There they are. Surveillance footage shows the two teen twins scrambling around the neighborhood shirtless at night. Duncan's 5 other children, alleged 7 to 14, have all been placed in CPS. The twins remain hospitalized. It's likely they will go into foster system once they were released. They face felony charges of injury to a child. Meanwhile, the father of the twins lives in Baton Rouge, Louisiana with his wife. It is unclear why he will not take them in. So I'm not going to get into the comments there. There's so many things about this story that are disturbing. How do these people qualify for a $4,000 a month place? That's what I want to know. Are they, where are they getting their money? Are they on Joe Biden's payroll? Are they getting funneled BLM money? Are they dealers? How are they affording this place? And why are they torturing these children? Are they torturing them because they don't want to spend the money? Are they gaining some kind of bizarre occult satisfaction out of all of it? Well, let me go into the symbolism of it here, because we're talking about twins, right? And we're talking about a retrograde coming up. And they were handcuffed. And for better or worse, they're liberated. And their lives are uncertain, but they're clearly not in the same hell that they were now. Think about that with Mars retrograde. And I don't think that it's any mistake that these two twins are so-called Black Americans. Because I also feel like something's going on with Black America. And every now when I'm on YouTube, I see more and more of these Black truth channels that are popping up. Now, there could be some of it which is just financially expedient, like, hey, Jericho Green gets a lot of views, or Officer Tatum gets a lot of views. Well, why don't we jump in? I don't think that's really the case. I think Black America is waking up, and that home, that's a McMansion, right? That's like a subdivision of the plantation. And Black America is now getting ready to leave the plantation. That's what's happening. To me, that's what that's symbolic of. So when you see the two twins, right, and the retrograde is the reversal, it's the release. That's symbolic. So that is a portent of what's coming. The cuffs are coming off, right? The cuffs are coming off. Clearly, I believe they're coming off of Black America, who now they're waking up and we've been so fucked over, by the so-called left. Now beware, the right will jump in and they'll be happy to gently exploit your new allegiance, right? But it's a better place to be than the so-called left, which has been assiduously working at disempowering that community for a very long time. Go all the way back to Johnson and the start of the Great Society and the handouts and all that stuff, right? It just snowballs. And where it's at now, I watch Jason Whitlock a lot. And so the pecking order in this whole thing is at the top of the pecking order, you have like the Joy Reids of the world, who are the Lizzos of the world, the Black Queens. And if you submit to the Black Queen and you're a Black male, you're okay. And if you're a Black male and you kneel in allegiance to the LGBTQ plus IA community, you're okay, right? That's how you maintain your status. But if you don't do that, you're excommunicated, right? Those are the cuffs that are coming off. And it's not just black men, right? We just had Candace Owens. Whatever you think of Candace Owens, she just did a big documentary on BLM and where all the money went, right? So the handcuffs are coming off. Remember, those are twins. That's important symbolism. Those are twins. And they're released, right? Repatriated, liberated. That's a symbol for where we're headed. So yes, it's a symbol that relates to a particular group of community, but we're all more or less have some form of indentured servitude on this planet. And some people have had a more visceral relationship with that than others. But we're starting to wake up now. We're starting to wake up. We're starting to see that we have more commonality than we do differences. And they don't want that shit to happen, right? So when I see an event like that from an astrological perspective, just prior to a Mars retrograde in Gemini, I pay attention to that. That's symbolic of the time that we're heading into, right? People are taking the cuffs off. People are ready to leave the Truman Show. And that's where all this is going. And when people find out that the last 2 years have been manipulated, coerced, psychologically imprinted, in seeing what's happened to their lives, livelihood, businesses, family, jobs, pitchforks and torches. Pitchforks and torches. That's where we're headed. All right. So what does that mean for you? Well, listen, I think there's a time where, going underground, being less visible can be a good thing. And maybe with Mars retrograde, maybe that's what you may want to do, right? From a practical standpoint, there are things with Mars retrograde that you can get done. Like there's a lot you can get done with the Mars retrograde in Gemini. If you've got unfinished projects or things that you have neglected, there's some stuff in my world that I got to deal with that Mars retrograde. I'm going to take advantage of it. And one of the things I've had a very difficult time with over the last few months is email. And this Mars retrograde, I'm going to dig into my email. And if it takes me the entire fucking Mars retrograde to get through all my backed up emails, I'm going to roto-rooter my email. But there's other things too that I want to deal with and take care of. So yeah, that's part of it, right? That's part of it with Mars retrograde. You can go back and do things and try to clean them up and use that energy. Don't be afraid of it. So there can be a productive time. It could be a very productive time. The production may not happen on the surface of things because we're headed into, the fallow time, the dark time. With all these eclipses coming up, it may be better to be in the background more. I'm not sure I can do that. I'm committed to doing these shows, working with you, right? I'm pot committed at this point, right? So I'm just going to continue to do what I do. But for some of you, you may want to, take some time out from your social media presence. Maybe you don't want to post all the time. Maybe you want to take a break from posting. I'm not saying you have to. You may consider it. And the other thing I would highly recommend is read some books with Mars retrograde. I think it'd be really good for you. All right. Let's have a little bit of fun here. Where are we? 9:40. When did I start? About 7. So we're 2 hours and 40 minutes in. Let's take this up to the top of the hour. I know my mods in the East Coast need to go to bed. Let's have a little bit of fun here. What am I talking about? I'm talking about Kanye versus Ben. This has been the heavyweight match this past week, right? Ben Shapiro has lost his fucking mind this last week. Let's see, how many times did he accuse Kanye West of being an anti-Semite in one interview or one of his little streams 21 times, something like that. By the way, he also compared him to Hitler. So I wanted to see what was going on with these guys in their charts. Strangely enough, there is some compatibility, but guess what? There's also some incompatibility. First of all, let's just take a look at Ben Shapiro's chart, which I have up here. In a lot of ways, I got to say, it's kind of a formidable chart. Taurus rising, Algol on the ascendant in Chiron there. He's a very loquacious guy, but I can tell you that it's not easy for him to speak all the time. Although you think because he has a motor mouth, he can do it. I don't necessarily think it's always the easiest thing for him to do. One man's opinion, although he can channel that ninth house sun. Remember, he's a lawyer, and he was kind of the story with Ben Shapiro is that he was one of these wunderkinds, graduated from high school early, went to college early, graduated from law school early. So he's one of those, when you were a kid, he was one of those kids you hated, right? Because he was just such a fucking prodigy. Anyway, he's able to channel that sun through the Chiron on the ascendant with that trine. So he's able to get more out of it than he might not get out of it. And he's got that moon conjunction with the true node in the first house, right? That's kind of interesting, kind of, especially when we put Kanye's chart over there. But he's got a pretty formidable chart. He's got a Pluto-Mars conjunction. Well, guess what's going to be right on that Pluto-Mars conjunction in 2 days, the solar eclipse. That's going to be very interesting for Ben Shapiro. David and I were talking a little bit about that because David's got that Mars-Saturn conjunction in Scorpio. David born a little bit later in 1984, right? First degree of Leo. So, or zero Leo, I believe, which would be the first degree. Anyway, he's going to have that eclipse on his Mars-Pluto. I was looking at that and I was thinking, what is Ben Shapiro? How is this eclipse going to, it's already affecting him. I mean, I could see him really blowing his cork, as if he hasn't blown his cork already. I could totally see him blowing his cork. And, would Ben Shapiro sue Kanye West? I mean, I don't think it's out of the question. I think it's on the table. But I feel like this eclipse is going to be very interesting. Very interesting. By the way, if you follow Archaics, I think Jason's sun is at 2 degrees Scorpio conjunct Pluto. So this eclipse is going to hit Jason of Archaics' chart. That should be interesting. Sit back and watch. Anyway, is Ben Shapiro going to lose his shit during this eclipse? It's quite possible. There could be a massive overreach here on his part, because we know that Scorpio is compulsive, and we might see another round of compulsivity depending upon what goes on with Kanye, who has basically found a way to leave Westworld. And with Shapiro, he's got all these really tight planets, Jupiter, Neptune, right at the end of Sagittarius, right, coming in and sextiling that Mars, Pluto. I mean, he's kind of formidable. I wouldn't want to be in a relationship with him. He's got that South Node Uranus conjunction. Yeah, I think that's a little, it could be a little kinky weird, I think. Mercury eighth house conjunct Neptune. I think he's probably got some very interesting psychic and intuitive faculties, although he would never really, I think, talk about them in those terms because Mercury in Capricorn is very, very solid, right? It's all about the business. And of course, with the sun in the ninth house, he's a lawyer. That's where he got to start. I don't think it's a real warm and fuzzy chart. I mean, even the water is intense, hard water. Mars, Pluto, and also in the sixth house, which is related to his work, right? He's going to be driven. And Saturn, limiting everything. So that's where his water really is. I mean, it's not warm and fuzzy water, and he's got the moon in the first house ingressing into the second. Again, kind of watery, but in Gemini, it's more, it's more schizo in some ways. It's more about talking about his emotions versus feeling anything. This is not a great feeling chart. He may have strong passion about his work. He may be driven by his work. But this is not a strong feeling chart. I would say that one of the things that he could have to deal with, I think Ben Shapiro probably has a fear of insanity. That's what I think. And in as much as Kanye is triggering all of his anti-Semitic furor, not furor as in the furor like Hitler, but furor, F-U-R-O-R, that furor, which is his outrage, right? I also think Kanye is triggering his latent sense of sanity. Ben Shapiro is a fucking control freak, right? You get that Mars-Pluto conjunction in the sixth house, which is Virgo's house. It's like super control-oriented, And then the sextiles with Mars, Pluto, into Jupiter and Mercury. Those are all control-oriented. He kind of loses control a bit in relationship, I think, right? Like his relationship life is just probably very weird. But I feel like Kanye is actually triggering his fears around his sanity. To me, it's this Mercury conjunction with Neptune so close together, right? And Jupiter is just like making everything bigger and frothing it up, and it's all the eighth house, which is hidden and occluded from the rest of the world. And then there's that inconjunct with Neptune and Chiron, and Chiron wanted to be controlled over here, and Kanye saying things in ways that he's not comfortable with. Well, he's probably saying things that he's not comfortable with, not just because he's hitting the third rail, but also because I'm sure that Ben Shapiro would like to say things that he's not entirely comfortable with, but he doesn't. And he's been caught off mic. He was saying something about something that was trans, and he was caught off mic. It was the stream was still going. He said, "Why don't you edit that out? Why don't you edit that out? We don't want to get in any trouble around that, right? Like, that he wanted to say that, but he didn't say it." He's got Pallas conjunct the midheaven, which I think is probably pretty good for sensing social trends and social media. He's built the Daily Wire in Nashville. Yeah, he's built a pretty strong business, although even that's kind of splintering a bit. I think there's a big difference of opinion between Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro around Kanye. And that'll probably come up even more. But I think Kanye's triggering fears around his own mental stability. Mercury-Neptune conjunctions, especially in the eighth house, can summon up like really deep shit and deep ghosts and deep fears, right? So in as much as I think Kanye is triggering his, fear of anti-Semitism and Hitler and the ovens and all the stuff that goes along with it, right? I think it's more than that. I think it has to do with Kanye, actually, because Kanye is saying things that Ben Shapiro can't say. And I think he's triggering them. So let's take a look at their charts together. So one of the things that really struck me is the Mars opposition. I mean, this is fixed right here. These guys are in conflict. They're in conflict. And what's interesting about Kanye is the position of Chiron, because he's risking, he's risking things and he's saying things and he's taking a risk with his things, right? And look at where his Mercury is. It's right on freaking Ben Shapiro's ascendant. You know that he's saying things that Ben Shapiro wants to say. It's coming right in, right? There's Shapiro's Mercury, Neptune in conjunct coming in right there. And there's Kanye's Mercury right in this. Ben Shapiro's jealous of Kanye West. Yeah, sure. Does he tweak his, anti-Semitic tropes and the whole thing around being Jewish and, all the baggage that goes along with it? Of course that's happening, right? The historicity of it. Oh, he's triggering more than that. He's triggering whatever's lingering in Ben Shapiro's site. I tell you that right now, just looking at his chart. I didn't see that before, but I'm seeing it now. And then we have these opposite Mars, like these guys are a fucking war, right? But then you have Kanye's sun and Jupiter around Shapiro's moon and true node. Again, this is active. This is the solar logos, right? This is the solar logos. Kanye is giving voice to things that Ben Shapiro is not giving voice to. Ben Shapiro can pick up on the emotional influence of the world. You can take the pulse of the world. You can say, okay, well, the world doesn't like pronouns. The world doesn't like these sorts of things, right? But it's more lunar. It's more receptive. And Kanye's sun is right on his moon. It would be interesting. I don't think it ever happened. But it'd be interesting to have these two guys on the same fucking podcast together. That'd be interesting. If Ben Shapiro had some nads, he would do it. He'd bring Kanye West would come on with him. But see, they wouldn't do that because, he's too hateful and you're giving Kanye a platform and all this other shit. I think it'd be really interesting, but it's not going to happen. Well, maybe it will happen. Who knows with Kanye? Anything's possible. But again, one is active, right? This is active. This is passive. And Kanye's Mercury is right on his ascendant. It's triggering the fuck out of Ben Shapiro's Chiron. And right in with that in conjunct. He's afraid. Ben Shapiro is afraid of losing his mind. That's what he's afraid of. That's what all this is. Yeah, sure, the other stuff is in there. Don't get me wrong. It's in there. And he's, loudly protesting, right, Kanye's assertions around Jewish power and what Kanye's experienced in the Jewish-run, powered-oriented record. It's true. He's not saying anything that's untrue. He's been on the front lines in this world for 20 years and more. Who would know? Somebody who's been in the business. And this is the thing that bothers me. Instead of just slamming him and saying anti-Semite, why don't you sit down and talk to him and say, what were your experiences like? Why do you say the things that you do? Obviously, you must have experienced something. Well, why don't you share those with us? But nobody's doing that with Kanye, right? And is Kanye go about this in a way that's haphazard and, kind of crazy loopy? Sure, absolutely. He's left Westworld. He's dealing with his programming, and it doesn't always come out in the most elegant way. Look, the moon squares. Kanye's got the moon in Pisces. The guy can feel. It may be hard for him at times with that square to his sun, Jupiter, Neptune, but there's no doubt that Kanye can fucking feel with the moon in Pisces. Ben Shapiro does not feel. He's got Moon in Gemini. He's going to talk about how he feels. Kanye is going to, risk how he feels, for lack of a better analogy here, right? It's a very interesting chart. Saturn squares, they come at the world differently, very differently. But to me, it's also what's interesting is if Kanye's true node is conjunct Ben Shapiro's vertex. Ben Shapiro could learn more about himself by engaging with Kanye. I guess he is, but is he fully engaging? This is so fascinating. This is so fascinating. This chart, right? There's some connecting points. Saturn trine, right? And then a lot of the Capricorn Taurus stuff. There could be a plane theoretically in which they could meet. But I'm telling you right now, Kanye is triggering the fuck out of him with this Mercury conjunction on his ascendant, that in conjunct with Neptune. And watch out, right? Watch out, because this eclipse is going to happen right on Ben Shapiro's Mars Pluto. So keep your eye on Ben Shapiro. And it's already happening. You can see he lost his mind last week. He became obsessed with Kanye West. You'll see that with the Mars Pluto stuff, but he's not done. Oh, this thing's not done. Right? He won't be done until Kanye West is put into an urn. With Mars Pluto there, he won't be done until Kanye's in an urn. So this is going to be very interesting to watch. I would love to have them on the same podcast. Maybe they could be on my show. Wouldn't that be fun? I'd love to be a part of that. But Ben Shapiro, I think Ben Shapiro's got one modality. He's got one modality, and that's attack. He's got an attack modality. He's got weird partnerships. He's got phobias. I can tell you that right now. This is all phobia city right here. And he's got the sun in the ninth house. He wants to be in the world and be seen as a kind of a great mind, a great legal mind. He's got one modality. Kanye's got more than one modality. Kanye's a bit more multidimensional than Ben Shapiro. But still, he's dealing with that Mars transit, going to be retrograding in his 12th house. Remember, we talked about this 2 weeks ago. And I said Kanye was in trouble, that people were going to start to come after him, and they have. And he's lost accounts. He lost his Balenciaga. Chase Morgan kicked him out, got to find another bank. He's hanging by a thread, a shoestring with Adidas. American Apparel stopped making his t-shirts. He doesn't care. He's on a burn it all down mission. But I said it 2 weeks ago. I would not be surprised if Kanye winds up on the Wailing Wall 6 months from now with a yarmulke on. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. By the way, I said I was going to talk about Trump. I'll touch on it a little bit, but I think I'll save it for next week when I'll talk more about Trump and Rishi Sunak, who looks like he's going to be the next PM of Great Britain, because Boris Johnson has stepped out. That Mars retrograde is happening pretty much right on Trump's sun Uranus. And there's two things that are possible with that. It's either the return of Trump or the arrest of Trump. So we'll keep our eye on that. And we'll have more, I'm sure, in the week ahead. And next Sunday night, we'll dive into that a little bit more. All right. I think we're here for a good solid 3 hours. Solid enough. Thanks for being here. We went on a journey, right? But there was a linear approach to the journey. So thanks for being here. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Love to each and every one of you for supporting my show, by showing up here, by getting readings with me, and by being a member of the 11th house. And I just sent out an email, and there's a couple of people didn't get the email. I'm going to send it to you. There is a private event for people who are members of the 11th house, and that's a private stream on election night, which we'll be watching elections and hanging out and talking astrology. So more of that to come. And if you haven't signed up, there are options on my website for that. Okay. Use your head in order to discern what's real. your heart to open to what's possible from myself and the Astro Cat right there. Right there. And big thanks to the mods for being here and doing your yes, thank you. Your stellar work on Sunday nights. Thank you all. We'll see you on Tuesday, 15 minutes of flame where we let it rip, 9:11 a.m., Tuesday through Thursday, Central Standard Time. Take care. Bye for now.